Hi, I'm Shawna.
And I'm Liz.
Welcome to Getting Bookish, a weekly podcast where we will talk about different book-related topics, let you know what we're reading, and even answer Q&As from you.
Be sure to visit our website, gettingbookish.com, and check us out on Facebook and Instagram at Getting Bookish. If you enjoy our podcast, we'd love for you to subscribe and leave us a rating and review, which helps us to be seen by other book lovers.
With all that said, we hope you'll enjoy Getting Bookish with us.
Enjoy the podcast.
Hello, everybody, and we are back after taking our kind of little break, our little vacation here in the month of August from ending season 1. We just wanted to kind of work on putting together some new content for you for our upcoming season 2. But we did not want to leave you completely for 2 months. So, of course, for August and September, we will be here for our bookish briefs just to let you know what we are still reading for the months. So I'm actually going to have Liz go first with what you have read for August, because my list is kind of short, but I'll explain why later.
Okay, it sounds good. So in August, I actually had kind of gotten back into reading again. I feel like, well, I was moving and just the months of summer, I don't know, everything just got away from me. I don't read a lot during the summer. It happens every year. But anyway, so I was able to read some books this month, and some were fantastic. Yes, and some weren't very fantastic. So those are fun to talk about too, though. So the first book I read, I listened to it on audio, so I don't have one to show you. It's called Hot Dog Girl. So August is romance books month. It has a cuter title than that. I can't remember what it is. And so I don't normally read romance. It's not a genre that interests me. And I was like, okay, I am challenging myself to read other things this year. So it's called Hot Dog Girl. It's by Jennifer Dugan. And I gave it 2 stars. It was awful. And not because it was romance. It's a YA romance, and it's about a girl named Eloise, and she's determined to make the summer between her junior and senior year in high school the best summer ever. And she is cast at their local carnival that they all work at. She's cast as the hot dog character, so that's where the title comes in. And so that's already not going well. And then the boy that she's had this crush on for a year and a half, he's still dating the girl who's always cast as the fairy princess. And so, at the beginning of the book, I'm like, oh, she's awkward and cute. She's me in high school. No, she's not. Because she is the most manipulative person. She doesn't care if she's hurting people. She doesn't care if she's making people do things they don't want to do.
Oh.
Her best friend is constantly mad at her because she's making her best friend do all these things. And she's not remorseful about it because she's getting her way.
Oh.
And, I finished the book, but it was terrible. I was like, you're the least liked character I've ever read.
She didn't grow by the end of the book then? She didn't change?
No. It was... 2 stars is probably generous. I think I gave it 2 stars just because the storyline was kind of cute. Mm-hmm. It was a cute idea, kind of taking place at this carnival they all work at. But okay. So that was the first book I read. So August did not get off to a great start. But then the second book I read is The Beholder. Ooh. The Beholder by Anna Bright. It has this very cool ship on the cover. And so this book I gave 3 stars. And so it's also a fantasy romance. And I gave it 3 stars because I felt like the story itself was pretty underdeveloped. It has a lot of allegory to really famous stories like Cinderella, and so these fairy tales and folklore stories and legends like Thor. And instead of weaving them together in this masterful story, which is what I was really hoping for, it was it was used as shorthand. So, like, you don't have to really describe this character because this character is essentially Thor. And you don't have to really describe this character because she's essentially
Cinderella or whatever.
Yeah, or like the evil stepmother. And so I just felt like all of these things, I was like, okay, I understand like what this person looks like and like who this person is as a character.
So it almost seemed kind of lazy.
Story. Yeah, and it's not a little book.
No.
It's not like, and so I just felt like it could have been so much more than it was, and it just had, I don't know, plot holes. It just let me down.
That's sad. Because I remember you telling me about the book when you got it, and I was really excited to see what you would say.
Really excited. And it was just not the best. I mean, I did give it 3 stars because there are things that happen in the book that I did not see coming, which was fun and always really exciting when you're like, whoa, I did not expect that to happen. And so, like, in that way, it was good, and I didn't want to, like, you know, give it a really bad review because I did enjoy it. I just thought it was going to be so much more than it was. So, that's the second book I read. So, the third book I read is The Dream Thieves. So I'm still doing the Raven Boys reread. That's with I Read YA. So this is book 2, and I read it twice. So this is book 3 and 4. So my friend and I are doing the reread together, and we both read it back to back. This is just, again, this is one of my favorite series of all time. This book specifically focuses on the character of Ronan. And it's about, there are 3 different kinds of secrets that are kind of shown in this book. And it's about dreams and dreamers. It's about, like, friendships that become so concrete, those people are now their family. Like, they're not even just friends anymore. And it's about trust, recognizing danger, and learning from your mistakes. It's a really exciting book. So that's book 2 in the series. I did read it twice. I give it all the stars. All the stars for The Dream Thieves. The next book I read is actually a book that you read. It doesn't have the cover. I can't find it, which is really unfortunate because the cover is so gorgeous.
So beautiful.
But it's Romanov by Nadine Brandis. Am I saying that right?
I think so, yeah.
Okay.
Brandis.
I always feel bad when I mispronounce an author's name. But so this is a story about Anastasia Romanov, and kind of following in like this trend in the YA world right now. So it's taking like a real thing that happened and it's adding magic. So this is the 5th book I read. I gave it 3 stars.
You and I haven't talked about this, so I'm interested.
I struggled with this one a little bit because I feel like I read a lot of fantasy, and I feel like if you're going to take a book, or if you're going to take a real thing that happened, and you're going to add magic to it, magic needs to be a really important part of the story.
Yes.
Like nothing in the plot could be happening if it wasn't for the magic, because otherwise it's still just the story that has been there all along. And I feel like for this book, a very large chunk of it was the same story regardless of if magic existed or didn't exist.
Yep. I completely agree.
And so I really struggled with that. As a fantasy reader, I'm like, why did they make this? Why not just have a fun retelling of Anastasia?
So let me ask you something. So did you, when you were reading it, because this is how I felt, like, quickly. I was reading it because I know the story, and a very tragic story.
Right.
And then all of a sudden I was like, whoa, magic? Like,
right.
I mean, right at this, point where they're all about to be, murdered, and then I it was almost like, oh, now we're doing the magic thing.
Yeah, and I just felt like, wait a second, it felt like cheating. So in fantasy books, my like base expectation is that magic is in some way like a way of life. Like if you have magic, you have magic.
But there was no magic in this book.
No, it was so
That's what I totally get it.
And so for me, especially as a fantasy reader, I'm just like, I love the story of Anastasia. I would have loved just a book about like Anastasia.
Or if they had made it magical from the beginning.
Yeah.
And you knew that at some point we're going to have to, pull out our magic are we going to save the whole family? Is it just going to be her?
Right.
Is it?
What's going to happen? I was just disappointed. And then the other thing that I felt a little bit frustrated with was I felt like there wasn't a lot of emotional depth. And so you guys know I talk about this all the time, like character and character development is really important for me as a reader. And I just felt like terrible thing after terrible thing after terrible thing happened. And they were all just like, huh, that happened. And they just moved on. And I'm like, what? What is happening right now? Like, why are we so accepting of this? And like, in my mind, I'm like, okay, well, like all these terrible things have been happening. Maybe they're just emotionally exhausted. But I feel like we needed to be shown that. Like if you're emotionally exhausted, maybe you wake up during the night crying, or like you drop your book on the floor and it makes you cry or makes you angry because your emotions are a mess. But there's like no emotions. And so I felt like I missed out on that too. I don't know. I had really high hopes for this book, and that's probably the problem. Was I was like, it's gonna be amazing, and so I had like my hopes were up here, and so then when my hopes were only met to here, I was like, well, I didn't like it.
Yeah,
it was a good story. I read the whole thing. I was compelled to sit down and read it. It wasn't like I was like, oh, I have to go read my book. Like it wasn't anything like that. I wanted more, I think, out of the story.
Yeah, I can get that.
Yeah. So there it is, Romanov. Eventually I'll find the cover. The cover is beautiful.
So pretty.
But I was so glad that I finally found the book because it was missing.
Yeah, I'm glad you got to finish it.
Me too. And I did start it over from the beginning.
Oh, you did?
So I didn't, because I was about a third of the way through when it got packed in a box. And I was like, I feel like it's been such a long time since I read. I need to go back and read from the beginning.
Looking real quick on Goodreads to see what stars I gave it. I liked it, but I had the same issues, but I was trying to overlook those because I like that time period. So sometimes I think that's what I do. Sometimes I like the time period so much that I overlook other things. I see your rating on here for it. It looks like I gave it 4 stars, but I didn't do a review on it. I think it's, you know what? I know why. I gave it 4 stars because I didn't want to say the things that we just said on the review because I wanted to like it so much more. But those were the things that not upset me, but that I was like, oh, like you could literally say magic starts on page 213 or something. It was like, I was like, oh, okay.
Yeah, and I want to say that if the book started on whatever page that is where the magic starts, that would have been good. Like, you didn't necessarily need any of that lead up.
Right, because we know the story.
That's the story we already know.
It was the exact story. Yeah. No, okay. I can see how if you didn't know the story, you could tell that story quickly.
Right. It could have been like a prologue or a whatever
a memory of something.
Yeah, of just like,
and then she finds herself in the woods
real quick. Yes.
Oh, yes. I like that.
See,
I like that.
Writing a book.
Yeah, because when they were in the woods, I was like, what just happened? Because we've never been on this magical adventure yet. And now we are. Hello.
Right. Well, and earlier this year, I read a book called Enchanté.
Yeah.
It was a Book of the Month Club book, and it takes place in Marie Antoinette's court. Mm-hmm. And so it's this very specific period in time. And Marie Antoinette is a character. She's not the main character, but she's a character in the story. And magic, if you took magic out of that book would only be like 20 pages long. Like, magic is the whole book. Mm-hmm. And so I think that's what I anticipated starting this one. Mm-hmm. And this one, it wasn't all I anticipated.
Yeah.
And so it didn't make it a terrible read, but because I'm trying to, if it's an average book, this was an average book. Mm-hmm. And so that's why I gave it 3 stars.
Okay.
So I'm trying to think more that way when I'm doing my star ratings now. And if it's above average, then it's 4 stars. And if it's outstanding, then it's 5 stars.
Would you give her another chance with another book?
I think so, because I don't think she was a bad writer. Mm-hmm. I think that I just didn't like how this book went.
I agree. Yeah.
Yeah. So I enjoyed the story that she told.
Okay.
I would have told it differently, not that I'm a writer.
Yeah, sorry guys, we went on this tangent of Romanov, but Liz and I literally have not got a chance to talk about this book.
I know.
And this is the first book we've both read, I believe.
I think so.
Besides when we talk about like Harry Potter and Twilight and all those things.
Right. Those don't count because we didn't read them right now. No, so
right.
I thought we were going to do that, so I was trying to keep my other.
Exciting.
Yeah, like I tried to be brief on the others. So that was my 5th book. So for 6 and 7, again, guess what? It was another book for the Raven reread. So this is Blue Lily, Lily Blue. And one of the characters in the book, the only girl in their friend group, her name is Blue. And so this book is, she's the more of the centralized character, I guess. And it's the 3rd book, so I'm not going to tell you what happens because that gives things away from the previous books. But I think when I tell people, I'm like, it's YA fantasy, but it's really about friendship. Mm-hmm. It's such a hard thing to explain. So I wrote down a quote that I'm going to read because I think that it just sums up like what these books are about so well. So here we go. You can just be friends with people, Orla said. I think it's crazy how you're in love with all those Raven boys. Orla wasn't wrong, of course, but what she didn't realize about Blue and her boys was that they were all in love with each other. Blue was perfectly aware that it was possible to have a friendship that wasn't all-encompassing, that wasn't blinding, deafening, maddening, quickening. It was just that now that she had had this kind, she didn't want the other. So, just a great friendship story. So anyway, this is book 3. Book 4 we're reading in September. So that will be a part of our September bookish brief. So that one's forthcoming. Again, I gave it 5 stars. That was my original star rating for the book, and it hasn't changed. So that was 6 and 7 because I read it 2 times because I'm addicted. My friend and I talk about these books because she's also doing the reread with me, and we talk about them like we're preparing to do a master class on these books. Funny. Like they're the greatest works of fiction ever.
I think I'm just going to have to go get the first book.
You do need it.
I keep saying that, but I'm going to.
The audio is fantastic. I've read them all at least a couple times a piece. Like read the physical book, but the narrator is amazing. Mm-hmm. And so if you're looking for an audiobook, I definitely recommend them on audio. All right. So then the last book I read this month, or that I finished so far this month, was Pan's Labyrinth, The Labyrinth of the Fawn. And it's by Guillermo del Toro, who wrote the screenplay for Pan's Labyrinth. That's not the movie Labyrinth. It's Pan's Labyrinth. It came out in 2006. I was confused at the beginning. That's why I specify. And Cornelia Funke. And Cornelia Funke wrote Inkheart. And she also wrote another series I love called Reckless. Actually, I think the series is called Mirror World. The first book is called Reckless. But they're both amazing storytellers, and so I was really, really excited to read this one, which always makes me really nervous because I'm like, when my expectations are up here, I'm usually disappointed.
Yeah.
But I gave it 5 stars. It's definitely a dark fairy tale. So if you don't enjoy that kind of story, you aren't going to enjoy this. If you feel like Little Red Riding Hood is a dark fairy tale, you're going to hate this book. Because that is child's play. Like, this is just, it's a fairy tale, but it's written for grown-ups. It's not written for children. And so I think it just makes a big difference. But this book is just, the story is so good because there's a good guy and a bad guy. You know, you see that in like good books all the time, but then there's like this monster. Mm-hmm. And I think of that like in Harry Potter. Like, there's the good guy, Harry, and there's the bad guy, Voldemort, and then there's the monster, Umbridge. And so, like, in this book, there's the good guy, who's Ophelia. She's the sweet and innocent girl in the story. And the bad guy, who's Pan, the fawn. And then the monster, who's Captain Vidal, and that's her stepfather. And it was just so good. And I listened to the audio, and the narrator because it's kind of like this Mexican folklore. That's where it's taking place, is in Mexico. And so he had like this real deep voice, but this like heavy Spanish accent. And it just made him it made it just a little bit creepier with him narrating it. It was really a fun, amazing read. And I think anytime you read a book that makes you want to go learn something else, mm-hmm. especially when it's a fiction book, like that never happens.
Yeah.
And so the time period is like at the end of World War II, but it's taking place in Mexico. Mm-hmm. And I was like, oh, I didn't realize that like the Mexican armies were like destroying places where arms were being made and sent to Germany. Mm-hmm. But then after they did all that no one came and helped them because they essentially started like a civil war in their country by doing that. And then no one came and helped them. And so they just had like this civil war. And I was like, wow, I didn't even know that happened. So now I want to go and read like real history about what happened after World War II in Mexico. So those were my 8 books that I read this month. And I'm happy to report that I am on track again for my reading goal.
Oh,
I
good.
was behind. So what did you read this month, Shawna?
Okay, so my books are slim again, but I do have semi-reasons for this. So the first book that I read, I don't have the physical copy because I borrowed it, but it's a long title, so I'm going to read it and make sure I don't forget any of it. Call the Midwife, A True Story of the East End in the 1950s by Jennifer Worth. Now, some people might be familiar with Call the Midwife. It's a Netflix series. I think it's Netflix. And have you heard of it?
I have heard of it. I've seen a couple episodes even.
So good. I have binge watched it like a long time ago. I can't remember how many seasons, maybe 16 seasons, I don't remember. But when I watched it, and there's a voiceover that's telling the story as though, you know, this is her going through this. And I never knew, maybe I didn't pay attention, that it was based on true stories, that it was based on someone's actual experiences as being a midwife in the 1950s in this very poor, rundown part of the country. But it was. And so listening to her, while reading it and just hearing how she describes things, knowing now it was a true story, I need to go watch it again. Now, of course, the way the book is set up, it's kind of like slice of life. So she has this chapter is about this one particular girl. The next chapter is this girl. And then the next one is this. Now, of course, for the show, they have to blend it all together with other characters and actually have a plot, It's an actual story, right? So I thought that was very interesting because reading the book, it was like almost like I was just hearing her notes on the different things that happened. And it was so amazing. I would recommend this to anybody. It was just fascinating. I love stories about midwifery. I think that's the word. I loved it. I love both the book and the show, which is rare.
Nice. Right.
Okay, so the next book is called I Am a Star, Child of the Holocaust, by Ing Auerbacher. And I got this book at the homeschool convention that I went to that she spoke at.
Oh.
So this book is actually signed by her, which I am so excited about because, I like reading and learning everything I can about this time in history. So we went to the Great Homeschool Convention in Jacksonville, and she was one of the keynote speakers. And so we got to her thing early so I could sit in the front row. I filmed the whole thing, and she showed like pictures. And then she sat there and she pulled out her actual star that she wore when she was a little girl. Oh, she had just had it in like a freezer bag. And she pulled it out, and it was this tattered little yellow star. And I was like, oh my goodness, one piece of cloth holds 1,000,000 stories and 1,000,000 tears. And it was so amazing. I recorded it so that I can show my kids later because I figure, they're not going to watch it now, but later I can show them and be like, I was there. Because I feel like in another maybe decade or less, there won't be any more survivors from that time period because I think she said she was 85. And when she went to the camps, she was, I think, 7 when she went to the camp. So she was 7, 8, 9, and 10. The camp that she went to, I believe she said there was 15,000 children there and only 150 of them survived. And she was one of those survivors.
Wow.
So and it was just awesome. So this is her book, and I read it. I got to meet her. I got to hug her. I thought it was awesome. So those are the 2 books that I read. What I'm reading currently is this one. Let me do this one first because I love this cover. This is called The Story Peddler, and I just love this cover so much. So this book, I just love it. It's the Weaver trilogy, so there's 3 books, and it's kind of a fantasy book because these people tell stories, and when they tell stories, these ribbons come out of their fingers, and different color ribbons, and the ribbons start to form some kind of artifact or statue or something from the story. So if you're talking about a castle and all this stuff, maybe your ribbons form a castle, and then it like solidifies, and you can sell that to somebody listening to your story, and that's how they make money. So they're story peddlers. They go and they tell these stories, and they sell these things to the crowd. And this particular girl, who is not treated very well at all by the people who are kind of mentoring her and story peddling, something always goes wrong. Like her ribbons aren't doing what they're supposed to do. She's not coming up with the right ending to her stories, and she's trying to figure out why. So that's where I am. But I like how at the top on the back here, it says, selling stories is a deadly business.
Ooh.
Yeah. So
that sounds so good.
It is. It really is. And I was hooked by chapter 1. I read chapter 1 standing there to decide if I wanted it. And I was like, yep, I need this book. So I'm really excited about that. The second book that I have that I'm going through, this is Mom, Master Organizer of Mayhem. So this is Simple Solutions to Organize Chaos and Bring More Joy into Your Home. This is by Christy Clover. And I'm reading this one dually with that one because this is more like not self-help, but it's just like encouraging and, you know, kind of that mom book, where this one obviously is my fiction book. But I love Christy Clover. I'm obsessed with her podcasts. She's a homeschooling mom, but she is all about finding that peace, finding a way to simplify your life in easy ways. So I would highly recommend this book. I also love that the cover has Legos all over it and that it says mom, because all I can think about is stepping on all of these Legos. So that is what I'm reading now. Liz, what are you currently reading?
All right, so I have 2 books. Both of them I've just started. I feel like that always happens. We have like this nice divide, like right before we do the bookish brief. Mm-hmm. But the first one I'm reading is called Gods of Jade and Shadow. Ooh. And it's by Sylvia Morano Garcia. And it's a book of the month book. And it's one of those books that I decided to challenge myself to read. It is a folklore like retelling, mm-hmm. which is something I really enjoy. But I was not attracted to this cover. And I decided, I was like, no, you know what? The description sounds good, so I'm going to try reading it. And I'm only about 2 chapters in, and I really am enjoying the story so far. So it's a Mexican folklore that's retold during the Jazz Age. And so and just the tone of the story is so fun so far. So I'm really enjoying it. Like I said, I'm only like 2 chapters in, but yeah, I was like, okay, I'm going to read a book that I don't like the cover of. And then the other one I'm reading is, I'm listening to it on audio, so I don't have a book to show, but it's called Barnum, An American Life, and it's by Robert Wilson. And it's about Barnum, like from Barnum and Bailey's.
Oh, I was going to ask if that's what it was.
Yeah, and I love everything about the circus. Like, I love circus history. Mm-hmm. I am very fascinated by it. And after the movie, what was that movie called?
The Greatest Showman?
Yes. So after The Greatest Showman came out, I was like, this makes it seem like he's a great guy, and he's a horrible guy. Like, they totally made it seem like he's like this American hero. And I'm like, he's not. Nope. Nope, that's not what was happening here. And so, like, I talk to people, and they're like, oh, my goodness, he's so wonderful. Like, I'm so obsessed with P.T. Barnum. And I'm like, do you know any circus history? So I've just started it, but it's really enjoyable so far because he did his research, because P.T. Barnum, he bought people and they were his slaves, mm-hmm. and he put them in the circus. And so, but I love that circus history. I love that time period in American history. And so, but that is, again, something I wouldn't normally read, because I don't read a lot of like biography, mm-hmm. or a memoir. Like, that's not my go-to genre. And so I am looking forward to breaking out of my genre mold. So next month I'll tell you how they went.
Yeah. So Liz, out of all the books that you have read this month, what would be your pick and your skip?
All right. So let's start with skip. My skip is very easy. It's The Hot Dog Girl. That book just had nothing redeeming about it. I did not care for Eloise at all. So skip The Hot Dog Girl. It has this very attractive cover. Like, the cover is so cute because it's this girl on the front dressed up like a hot dog, and it's hilarious. And no, don't do it. Don't go there. So my pick of the month, like, it would be so easy to pick another Raven Boys book, but I'm not going to do it. I am going to pick Pan's Labyrinth because I really enjoyed the story. It was just, it felt like a bedtime story, even though it was scary. So if you like that kind of book, it was fantastic.
Awesome.
So what are yours? Well, do you have a pick and skip? You just
I had 2 books I read for August, so that's really hard. So I think if I had to pick I would pick Call the Midwife if I had to pick, only because I listened to her tell her story. Oops, that's upside down. I listened to her tell her story, and that was so fascinating that when I read the book, I was like, well, I listened to her. So
right.
It was so much better to listen to her. So I'll just go ahead and pick Call the Midwife. And I won't do a skip because I feel like I can't.
Well, neither one of them were a skip. So
no.
Okay.
Up against anything, nothing was a skip. Now, let me just explain why I only had a handful of books. I was at 2 different conferences this month. One was for my work, and then one was for the Great Homeschool Convention, because we homeschool our kids, and so I'm obsessed with going to homeschool conventions. And one of the reasons is because they bring a lot of authors there, and you can meet and greet and talk to the authors. They have panels. The authors chat. They are more than willing to sign whatever you have. There's not these incredible lines that you would get at like a Barnes & Noble or something. And you can actually have like real conversations with the authors. And I love it. So it's terrible. We buy so many books at these homeschool conventions. So that is why I did not read that much, but I'm definitely collecting the books.
Collecting and reading are separate hobbies.
Totally separate hobby. We need that on a t-shirt.
Yes.
And it needs to say, reading and collecting books are separate hobbies, and then do like the quote from Getting Bookish.
Yeah.
Lizz from Getting Bookish.
Thanks so much for joining us this week. We will be back in September for another Bookish Brief, and then season 2 is coming soon.
Yes, and we have some great things planned for it, some great guests, so stay tuned, and we will see you at the end of next month for September's Bookish Brief.
Bye!
Thanks for listening. We hope you enjoyed hanging out with us. Don't forget to check us out on social media and subscribe to our podcast so you don't miss out on any of the fun. See you next week.